The cycle of restaurant chains in America is ever-changing. Choices, food options, tastes, among many things. And many have their era to shine, and then they don't. That doesn't mean they cease to exist, though. And in this video, we will look at 3 more restaurant chains that are well past their prime. First off, we have the original version of A&W. A&W has existed over 100 years. At its peak, in 1974, it would have 2,400 locations. Today, it has just around 900. And while that is still pretty big, it has lost around 62.5% of its former location's peak. The company took off in the 1920s just as simple root beer stands with food options, and it would grow to around 450 locations by the 1950s. Several of its products would become widely available in stores as well, and in the 50s it was basically unstoppable, roughly quadrupling in size, with it having around 2,000 locations at the beginning of the 1960s. It's fair to say A&W was like the McDonald's before McDonald's. It had come up with franchising decades before Ray Kroc and McDonald's would in the 50s, and its restaurant footprint exceeded that of McDonald's all the way until the 1970s. However, issues with franchisees at this point, and more notably, the mass growth of newer chains such as Wendy's, McDonald's, and Burger King would result in massive amounts of closures through the 1980s. In fact, today, A&W Canada, which is completely separate from the American version, actually has more locations than the original, despite Canada being much smaller in population than the US. Today in the US, it's mostly a mixed bag company, with locations spread far apart from each other, and in somewhat randomized locations. Today it exists in America, but nothing compared to its prime days. Next we have Perkins, a family restaurant sit-down chain. At its estimated peak in the late 1990s, it had 462 locations. Today, it has just 288 locations, resulting in a 37.7% loss. Perkins would begin in Ohio as primarily a breakfast restaurant in 1958. It would expand to other offerings throughout the day besides breakfast, though, and also would include bakeries eventually. Its growth would be pretty stable through the 1990s, however, in the 2000s, the decline would start to set in. The economy of the late 2000s would really put a strain on this restaurant chain, and eventually Perkins would go bankrupt twice, and many locations have closed over the years. With this, I think it's just kind of a more antiquated food concept. There's really nothing that stands out over newer chains. And third, we have Golden Corral. This buffet restaurant chain really was able to surpass the declines of several other buffet chains such as Hometown Buffet, but of late, they have not been doing well. They've had a relative peak throughout the years of around 500 restaurants, but today, if we don't count the ones that are listed as temporarily closed on their website, they have only 352 operating restaurants right now, which means from their peak, they have lost about 29.6% of their locations. Now, the biggest reason for this decline is definitely the pandemic. However, the pandemic was such a huge blow to this company that it really has not recovered. And to be honest, I don't think that it ever will. I think people just moved on during the pandemic and are not going back in the numbers that they were before. Buffets in general, without question, have declined over the years, and it's likely being away for a while just expedited the process that was already going on before the pandemic for the industry at large, even though Golden Corral's locations were pretty strong before the pandemic. Just based on the fact that there are so many locations still listed as temporarily closed, now over 4 years since the start of the pandemic, it's likely that this company's probably just going to stay in a relative holding pattern for the near future, if not decline more. So let me know what you think. Do you enjoy going to these restaurants still? Do you wish there were more around? Let me know, and thank you for watching.